Under the black domes of umbrellas, merging with the gloomy symphony of rain that poured down with such fury, as if the sky itself was mourning not only the loss, but also something more, perhaps the very loss of the end of an era, I, Isabella, stood in front of two coffins covered with heavy black cloth reflecting every whim of light, which was difficult. I fought my way through the leaden clouds, feeling an inexpressible feeling of emptiness tearing me away from my own skin, forcing me to perceive what was happening as if through muddy water, through which even a scream seemed muffled, unnaturally far away. My parents left suddenly, in one short, pitiless instant, a tragic car accident in which, as the police told me with cold dryness, there were no survivors, no witnesses, no chance of saying goodbye, only sudden silence and two coffins as proof that love can also be mortal. And before we continue, write in the comments from which city you are watching this video. Enjoy watching. Isabella, a voice suddenly cut through my daze, and I turned to see Carlos, the man who had called me his wife for 8 years, with whom we shared not only a house, but also dreams, fears, moments filled with light and quiet, warm happiness. His hand rested on my shoulder, but what had once brought me comfort and strength now felt like a stranger's touch, cold and mechanical, as if he were fulfilling a duty rather than expressing sympathy. "We need to talk," he said, and I nodded, not understanding the intonation, assuming that he was going to discuss organizational issues, maybe offer me support, tell me that we could handle it, that we shouldn't keep everything to ourselves. The cemetery was already empty by that time. Even the priest, having expressed formal sympathy, disappeared in his car, and only the two of us remained alive, and the gravediggers in the distance, patiently waiting for our mournful presence to give way to the earth, which would take my parents into its cold bosom. "Not here," I whispered, and my voice traitorously trembled, breaking on the last word. "Please, let's go home." "No," Carlos replied, and there was no softness or pain in his voice, just a dry, businesslike determination, as if he were reading out a list of tasks for the day. "It's perfect here. There are no witnesses." I looked up at him, not understanding why he chose those exact words at that moment, in the midst of this downpour and grief, but what I saw filled me with confusion and fear. His face, once beloved, once painfully dear, now seemed like a mask cast from it was an alien material, with hard lines and icy eyes that reflected nothing but calculation. "I'm leaving you, Isabella," he said, and those 5 words, taken out of a completely alien context, hung in the air like something unreal, impossible. I blinked, expecting him to correct himself, to say that this was a joke, that grief had driven him crazy, but he only repeated, clearly now, dissecting each syllable with clinical precision, "Yeah. You. I'll leave it." My mind, clouded by pain, tried to decompose into semantic units what he was saying next, that I was now broke, that my parents had died without leaving me a penny, that their financial picture was just an artfully created illusion, supported by debts and facades, like, for example, that bright sports car, which I chose for his birthday, like our many vacations that he told his friends about with such pride. "Yes, Isabella, your father was based only on reputation. The small publishing house stopped making profits a long time ago, and in recent years all they had was to maintain their image," he said, and I stood soaking up the rain that soaked through my morning dress, feeling neither cold nor damp, only a growing numbness, as if the pain was pushing me out. "The penthouse is registered in my name," he continued, glancing at his watch, as if he was in a hurry for the next meeting, as if he hadn't just destroyed my life to the ground. "You have until the end of the week to move out. I've already contacted a lawyer." I looked into his face, in which I tried in vain to discern at least an echo of the Carlos who once read Rilke's poems to me with a tremor in his voice, who swore to hold my hand forever, no matter what happened. "Why are you doing this?" I asked, and my voice, barely audible under the drumming of the rain, barely cut through the viscous silence between us. His answer was a grin, a thin, venomous one that made me shudder. "I've never wanted luck, Isabella," he said, taking a step back, as if he were putting the last stat on a letter written in blood. "You'll need it." He left without turning around, disappearing into the gray haze of rain, leaving me standing alone, between two coffins, between a past that had just collapsed and a future in which there was no longer a home, no love, or even illusions. I didn't shout after him, didn't fall to my knees, didn't punch the wet ground with my fists. I just stood there, and the tears I hadn't noticed mixed with the rain, wiping everything from my face that still reminded me of my former life. That night, As soon as I crossed the threshold of the penthouse, which for so long seemed to me not just a home, but a reflection of a life together, built, as it seemed to me, on trust, love, and a common future, I suddenly felt a strange, enveloping emptiness, as if the walls, furniture, photographs, and even smells refused to recognize me, turned away, renounced, just like the man I had lived with for almost a decade. And now, walking through rooms so painfully familiar and terribly alien, I slid my fingers along the shelves, along glossy frames with images caught in a carefree smile, along the spines of books, which still had creases from our quarrels over which of us would read them first, feeling like every detail betrayed me by remaining unchanged, while my life was crumbling, leaving only fragments, among which there was not a single solid foundation. I found Carlos in his office, and the picture that appeared before my eyes was almost symbolic. He was putting his manuscripts in a cardboard box, carefully, with the attention that he didn't seem to have spent on our marriage for a long time, and I, standing in the doorway, couldn't help but ask the question that he burned me from the inside out, demanding an answer not for the sake of the truth, but for the sake of at least some understanding, at least some meaning in what was happening. When did you stop loving me? He didn't turn around, but continued to stack the pages, as if I had asked a question about the weather or the electricity bill, and after a few excruciatingly long seconds he answered, "Does it matter?" And then, finally, he looked up, met my gaze, and said something that truly devastated me. "I've never loved you, Isabella. I loved what you represented, your connections, access to your father's publishing world, lifestyle, your family's money. You could have provided all this. But now it's not." These words hit me like a hail of nails, and I, feeling my breathing become heavy, slumped my shoulder against the door jamb, trying not to suffocate from the pain, from the inability to realize that 8 years of my life, were given to a man who viewed me as a means, as a way to achieve something he couldn't achieve on his own. I whispered, and my voice trembled treacherously, barely audible in the silence, broken only by the rustle of paper in his hands. For 8 years, I lived with someone who just used me. He grinned, and there was everything in that grin: condescension, fatigue, cold confidence. Don't be dramatic, Isabella. You got what you wanted, too, the perfect husband to talk about over cocktails at the country club, someone who confirms your existence as something more than just a trust fund girl. We used each other. But he was wrong. I loved it. Wholly, stupid, blind. And only now I realized how defenseless love is before calculation. That night, I slept in the guest room, lying on the bed as if on boards, staring at the ceiling, which reflected the flashes of all the years I had lived, while my mind, like an old movie projector, replayed over and over scenes from our life together in a futile attempt to find clues that I must have missed once. By morning, my grief had frozen, turning into something else: not rage, not revenge, but determination, cold and clear as ice. I wasn't going to destroy what was left, I was going to leave. I packed only the essentials: clothes, a few pieces of my mother's jewelry that reminded me of her warmth, and the laptop Carlos had given me for Christmas, which now seemed almost an ironic gesture. I didn't leave a note, just because there was nothing worth saying anymore. I didn't know where I was going. I just went out, pulled out my phone, and scrolled through my contacts, helplessly, desperately, looking for at least one name that would not be related to him, would not be common, would not force me to plunge back into the past. Most of the names on the screen were of friends, common ones, couples with whom we shared holidays, trips, secrets, and I understood that now, having learned about our separation, almost all of them would choose Carlos' side, because he remained there, in the world of privileges and dinner parties, and I did not. But suddenly, among all these names, I saw her. Angelica Goldoni. My college roommate. The woman that Carlos always disliked, considering her too loud, too harsh, too complicated, and perhaps that's why we distanced ourselves, as it often happens when your partner slowly, unobtrusively, but methodically eliminates everyone who is able to see you for real. We exchanged postcards and occasional comments on social media, but the bottom line was that she was the only person whose life wasn't tied to him. With trembling fingers, I pressed the call button, hardly hoping that she would answer. But after the third ring, her voice rang out, "Isabella? It's you? I've heard about your parents. I'm so sorry." Her voice, full of genuine concern, pierced me like an arrow, and for the first time in all these days I remembered what real concern sounded like. Angelica, I swallowed, trying to cope with the growing lump in my throat. I need help. 2 hours later, I was sitting on her worn couch in a modest but cozy apartment in Brooklyn, cupping a hot mug of tea in my hands, and telling her everything from the death of my parents to Carlos' betrayal, from the penthouse to the train on which I escaped, from my previous life to emptiness. When I finished, she looked at me with a fire in her eyes that I hadn't seen in a long time, and squeezed my hand. What a complete bastard he is, Isabella. The way he treated you, at your parents' funeral. There is a special place in hell for such men. I smiled through my tears, for the first time in many days. I do not know what to do, I confessed, almost in a whisper. I have no money, no job, no skills. I have been the wife of Carlos Armani and the daughter of Nestor Berlusconi all my adult life. Angelica's expression softened, and, embracing me with a look in which there was more faith than I could muster in all the last days, she said quietly but firmly, "That's not true, Isabella. You have a degree in English literature from Columbia University, and it's not just a paper, it's proof of your intelligence, talent, and the fact that you can do more than you think. You're smart, resourceful, and much stronger than you realize right now." I grinned, not mockingly, but with that tired irony that comes from a person who has stopped waiting for a miracle, and whispered, "I didn't use my diploma for anything other than to analyze the classics on the shelves of our home library." "So it's time to dust it off," she interrupted, squeezing my hand and suddenly becoming that anchor for me that I didn't know I was missing so desperately. "You can stay here as long as you need to. My spare room isn't fancy, but it's yours now. And by the way, I might have some work for you. My agency is looking for a new assistant. The salary is not too big yet, but this is the entrance, the first step into the publishing world, one about which you know much more than you think, even if you don't realize it now." And then, for the first time since the day of the funeral, since that gloomy morning when the whole world seemed completely lost to me, I felt a glimmer of something almost forgotten hope. "Do you really think I can handle it?" I whispered, and there might have been more doubt than faith in my intonation. Angelica nodded, smiling gently. "I don't think so, Isabella. I know. This is not the end. This is the beginning. Terribly painful, yes, but still a start." That night, lying in her spare bedroom, a room full of bookcases, old magazines, theater posters, and worn pillows with quotes from Virginia Woolf and Sylvia Plath, I finally allowed myself to burst into tears. The tears were heavy as mercury, and they flowed not only for my parents, not only for my marriage, but also for the woman I once was protected, off, living in a penthouse and thinking that the world revolves around her. And by the morning, when those tears had dried, all that remained inside me was a strange clarity. Everything that defined me as a person, everything that I was proud of, was gone, and now I had to figure out who Isabella Marchetti was. When my father's last name was gone, the status of Carlos Armani's wife was gone, when all the shiny shell collapsed, revealing something fragile but authentic. I couldn't have known that the real shock was still ahead, that Carlos' betrayal was just the first tremor of an earthquake that was supposed to destroy not only my lifestyle, but everything I believed in. My life, as it turned out, was on quicksand, and what I thought was the truth was just a carefully constructed illusion. Somewhere in the rubble, I had to find answers to questions that I didn't even dare ask myself. And so, as I was falling into an anxious sleep, exhausted, my phone vibrated with a message. I picked it up from the table, squinted, and saw that it was from an unknown number. "Mrs. Armani, this is Antonio Rossi, your parents' lawyer. There are issues regarding their property that require immediate attention. Please contact me as soon as possible. What you think is true is not the whole story." I stared at the screen, feeling my heart pounding in my throat. What else could be discussed? Unless Carlos was lying to me about that, too. If he lied about my parents' financial situation, too. Sleep didn't matter anymore. I sat up in bed, held the phone in my palm, my finger hovered over the call button. Whatever awaited me behind this call, I knew one thing for sure: I would no longer allow the truth to be hidden from me last. The law firm of Finch and Associates occupied the entire 15th floor of an austere glass-clad building in the heart of Manhattan, just off Fifth Avenue. The next morning, When I got into the elevator, I was acutely aware of every crease in my blouse, every circle under my eyes, which seemed to have become a permanent shadow of my new self. A week ago, I would have walked in here in a designer coat, with perfect makeup, as a picture of well-being and taste. Now I felt like an imposter, stuck in a place where she supposedly no longer belongs. "Mrs. Armani?" "What is it?" asked a thin man with neat gray hair at the temples, wearing an expensive but not provocative suit. He held out his hand. "Antonio Rossi." "Thanks for taking the time." "Berlusconi," I corrected him. The last name sounded strange, as if it were someone else's, as if I'd said it for the first time. He tilted his head slightly, and there was no shock or surprise in his eyes, but a quiet, almost sympathetic understanding. "I understand. Please come in." We entered his office, and in this wood-paneled room with heavy leather-bound volumes and a view of Central Park, I felt like I was part of an old novel where every word a lawyer said could turn someone's fate around. Rossi pointed to a chair opposite the table, and when I sat down, he said, almost formally, "Ms. Berlusconi, what I'm about to tell you is extremely confidential. Before we begin, I need your confirmation that this conversation will remain between us." My stomach clenched, as if my body knew it was only going to fall, but I nodded. "Sure." Rossi took off his glasses, rubbed the bridge of his nose tiredly, and began. "Your parents came to see me 3 months ago," Rossi began in a restrained but distinctly anxious voice, and his eyes, peering at me from behind thin gold-rimmed glasses, as if trying to assess my ability to perceive what he was about to say, "they were worried about your husband, Carlos." I involuntarily leaned forward, tensely gripping the arms of the chair, as if my body was trying to cling to something stable in advance of the impending storm. "Why?" I asked, trying to stay calm, even though my heart was already starting to pound somewhere near my ribs, anticipating something I didn't know yet, but was already afraid of. "They had reason to believe that he was not who he claimed to be, that his interest in you, and therefore in your family's publishing house, was not entirely sincere." For a moment, the air in the room became so heavy and thin that I could almost feel it leaving my lungs. "What do you mean?" I whispered, feeling a wave of anxiety slowly rising up my spine. Rossi nodded, like a man who has to reveal something that can destroy not only someone's life, but also the very essence of self-identity. "Your father hired a private investigator to investigate Carlos' background. What they found was disturbing." He opened a drawer in his desk, slowly, with almost ceremonial neatness, took out a heavy manila folder and slid it across the polished surface towards me. My hands, despite my effort to maintain my dignity, were shaking as I picked up the folder and opened it. What I saw inside seemed to take away my last illusions. Photographs of Carlos taken in secret, in which he met men in restaurants, hotel lobbies, even in parking lots. Men I had never seen, unfamiliar faces, but their looks and gestures spoke of something businesslike, serious, secretive. Then there are pages of financial reports showing the movement of large sums through accounts that I did not know existed. And finally, the document that turned my fingers cold is a detailed report, indicating that Carlos had been systematically undermining Wheeler Publishing from within for several years. "I don't understand," I blurted out, but already at that moment, an ominous, painfully logical picture began to surface in the depths of my mind, in which events that seemed disparate began to take shape in a harmonious, eerie pattern. Rossi continued gently but clearly, "Your husband methodically sabotaged the work of the publishing house. He rejected promising manuscripts, prevented the involvement of key editors, mismanaged and intentionally managed funds, and all the while prepared the ground to take control of the company at the moment when it was on the verge of collapse." I closed my eyes, as if I could close my thoughts, but they were already seething beyond my control. I thought back to the moments that seemed insignificant to me, Carlos' persistence in participating in board meetings, his frequent conversations with my father, after which he looked more tired and disappointed, his insistence on certain investments, which I then considered only a manifestation of concern. And yet, I was trying to find the logic, but why? Wheeler Publishing is not a technology giant, not a banking corporation. It's not worth the effort. "It's not about the current market value," Rossi interrupted, his voice becoming a little more strained, "but about his catalog. Intellectual property rights apply to hundreds of books published over the past 50 years. If properly managed, especially in today's digital space, they can bring in millions. I felt dizzy, and I almost lost my balance. The truth, which seemed to crumble the ground under my feet, was overwhelming. I tried to speak, but my throat was dry. And my parents, the accident, I began, but Rossi already understood what I was getting at, and an expression appeared on his face that I was afraid of, a shadow blackening at the corners of his eyes. The police report mentions a malfunction in the braking system of your father's car. The time and circumstances raised doubts in the investigation, but no evidence of intent was found. I stared at him, unable to formulate a thought, and then, in despair, I said, "Are you saying that Carlos had something to do with their deaths?" The word seemed absurd, impossible, but at the same time inescapably logical, as if I had known all along, but didn't want to believe. "I'm not making accusations," he said carefully, "but you should know that your parents' financial situation was far from what Mr. Armani claims." He slid another folder towards me, already smaller in size, but, as it turned out, no less significant. It contained bank statements, property documents, and investment reports. Despite the difficulties experienced by the publishing house, your parents have long diversified their investments. They invested in real estate, technology, and had stakes in successful startups, as well as in a popular literary application. Their total cost is millions of dollars. I pressed my fingers to my temples, feeling everything spinning around me, not just the room, but my reality itself. "But," Carlos said. I began, and then Rossi interrupted me. "Mr. Armani only knew what your parents wanted him to know. They started hiding some of the assets when they suspected that his interest was motivated not by concern for you, but by a desire to gain control over their legacy." I closed my eyes, desperately trying to comprehend the scale of these revelations. Everything fell into place: Carlos's coldness, the sudden breakup, the rejection of marriage. "So that's why he left me," I muttered, not so much asking as stating. "He thought I was broke." "But you're not broke, Miss Berlusconi," Rossi said firmly. "On the contrary. You are the sole heiress. Everything they own now belongs to you, including a controlling stake in Wheeler Publishing." Hysterical laughter escaped my lips, shrill and insanely out of place in this silence, saturated with the smell of old papers, brass, and restrained men's cologne, laughter born at the junction of pain and amazement, like the last spark of pride in the ruins of my life. "He left me at my parents' funeral," I said aloud, not so much to Rossi as to myself. "He left at a moment when I could barely stand on my feet, because he was sure that I had nothing more to give, that my name, my family, my legacy, everything was turned into dust." Even the walls of the room seemed to shake at this revelation. Rossi nodded, and something close to compassion flashed across his face, but he quickly returned to a restrained professional manner. "Your husband has already begun the procedure of challenging the will, claiming that as a legal spouse he has the right to part of the assets." My fleeting sense of triumph, shaky, almost childish, collapsed in an instant, like a house of cards destroyed by a single whiff of reality. Of course, Carlos wouldn't let go so easily. As soon as he realized that he had made a mistake, that his premature departure was a fatal strategic mistake, he, as always, tried to regain control by shifting the cards to the other side of the table. "What should I do?" I asked, feeling anxiety grow in my chest again, but Rossi, to my surprise, smiled restrainedly, almost reassuringly. "To fight. Just fight. Your parents foresaw this turn of events. They left you not only a fortune, but also the means to protect it." He opened another drawer, took out a small key on a leather cord, and carefully placed it in front of me. "This is from the safe deposit box at the Manhattan Bank branch. Inside are the documents that will help you keep Mr. Armani at a distance. I recommend that you pick them up as soon as possible." I looked at the key as if it were an artifact from another world, an echo of my parents' caution, love, and foresight. "What kind of documents?" I asked, even though the answer was already lurking at the edge of my consciousness. "It's better if you see for yourself," Rossi said, "but I'll say one thing: your parents were preparing for the worst. They wanted to make sure that you would be safe no matter what." When I left Rossi's office, clutching the folders and the key to my chest like a shrine, my mind was seething with overwhelming feelings, bottomless grief for my parents, rage over Carlos' betrayal, fear of the future, which now unfolded before me with frightening clarity. But on top of all this, something new was slowly rising, alien, but attractive: power. For the few blocks that I walked, not understanding the road, this feeling took shape. I am Isabella Marchetti. Not just the widow of Carlos Armani. Not just Nestor Berlusconi's daughter. I am the sole heiress, a woman on the verge of reviving her own name and destiny. I took out my phone and typed a short message: "Angelica, we need to talk. Urgently." The answer came like lightning: "My office. In an hour. Bring expensive wine." I smiled through the bitterness. Angelica always knew what the moment required. The Manhattan Bank branch was only a few blocks from Angelica's agency, and I decided I'd get the contents of the safe first. I had to know exactly what my parents had left me. The bank manager greeted me with proper respect, a look that reflected not so much respect as awareness of the weight of my last name. Despite everything, the name Marchetti still meant something in the city. He personally escorted me to the storage room, unlocked the heavy door, and left me alone with the box on the table in the inspection room. I inserted the key, the lock clicked, and the lid slowly lifted. There were 3 things inside: a thick sealed envelope with my name written in my father's confident, recognizable handwriting, a black USB drive, and a small leather diary. I recognized it immediately. It belonged to my mother. My heart was beating fast, as if my body was trying to catch up with my mind, which was already racing ahead in guesses and disturbing assumptions. I opened the envelope with trembling fingers. "My dear Isabella," my father's letter began, and I felt a wave of warmth and pain wash over me at the same time. "If you're reading this, it means our worst fears have come true." He wrote that together with his mother, they had uncovered the disturbing truth about Carlos, his manipulations, lies, carefully built network of connections with Wheeler Publishing's competitors, and the belief that he had married not out of love, but with the cold calculation of gaining access to the rights to the catalog, which was the heart and soul of the business. Our family. To confront him directly, his father wrote, was too dangerous. We started collecting evidence and building an action plan. The flash drive contains all the materials: correspondence, financial documents, recordings of conversations. That's more than enough to stop Carlos. My hand trembled as I continued to read, clutching in my fingers a thin sheet of paper soaked in time, the ink of which seemed to not only convey words, but enliven my father's voice, which sounded from the other side of eternity, through the fabric of grief and love. "Isabella, we know this will be devastating for you," the letter said, and I could almost hear my father pausing, choosing his words, trying to soften the truth that I was going through. "We watched you build a life with this man, believing in his love, and there was no condemnation or reproach in these lines, only a quiet, deep sadness frozen between the lines, like frost on glass. Please know that all this is not your fault. You saw the good in him that he pretended to be. It's the same quality that makes you your mother's daughter, the ability to see the best in people." Tears blurred my vision. I could no longer see the letters, but I knew that I had to finish reading. I had to let each word rest on my heart like a lead weight and like a balm at the same time. The last paragraphs were not so much about Carlos as about faith, in those around me and in myself. Trust Antonio Rossi. Trust Angelica Goldoni. Yes, we've been in touch with her all these years. She knew about some of our problems and was a silent ally. And most importantly, trust yourself. You're stronger than you think, smarter than you were allowed to believe. It's time for you to take back your life and your legacy. All our love is always there. Dad and Mom. P.S. The diary contains your mother's thoughts and observations about Carlos over the years. Her instincts were always sharper than mine. Read it when you're ready. I clutched the letter to my chest, feeling the walls of pain, resentment, and distrust crumble at once, and instead something new rises, a pillar of memory, devotion, and quiet, unrelenting anger. They've known all along. They were trying to protect me from a predator in my own home, from a man whose love turned out to be just a convenient mask. The flash drive was supposed to wait until I got to my laptop, but I put my mother's diary in my bag, even though I knew I couldn't read it now. Some of the wounds were still too fresh, the words were too sharp. When I arrived at Angelica's agency, I was surprised to see her alone in the conference room, as if she knew that I would need not only conversation, but also silence and space to live it all over again. The bottle of wine was already open, and there were 2 glasses on the table, one of which she immediately filled generously, almost ceremoniously. "I've cleared my schedule for the rest of the day," she explained, handing me a glass. "Your message was marked as SOS. You have no idea how quickly I threw everything away and rushed over." I put the folders from Rossi's office on the table, the key, which now seemed to me a symbol not of fear, but of power, and asked, looking her straight in the eye, "Did you know about Carlos? About my parents' suspicions?" Angelica's face darkened, his features became tougher. "Not all of them," she replied calmly, "but your father contacted me about 6 months ago. He was worried about Carlos' business dealings, something seemed wrong to him. But he didn't want to upset you with vague suspicions. I helped him contact people who could discreetly conduct a check." "Why didn't you tell me?" I asked, my voice trembling, but not from resentment, but from understanding. "Would you believe me?" Angelica replied softly but firmly. "You were in love with him, Isabella. And I was the very friend that he successfully ousted from your life many years ago." She was right. Then I probably would have believed Carlos, even if it meant ending my friendship with Angelica, and I almost did. "I'm sorry," I whispered, and she nodded. "Don't. The main thing is that you're here. And judging by your face, you know the truth." I told her everything from the letter I found in the safe, to the cold evidence on the flash drive, to the betrayals that, as it turned out, were visible to everyone except me. Angelica was silent for a long time, looking at the dark ruby wine in her glass, as if she was trying to see the future in it. "What are you going to do?" "What is it?" she finally asked. I took a deep breath. "Fight. For my parents, for their memory, for the company they dedicated their lives to. I will make sure that Carlos gets exactly what he deserves." Nothing. A slow, satisfied smile spread across Angelica's face. Here she is. The same Isabella Berlusconi that I remember from college. The one who once trashed a pretentious poetry professor who dared to say that your analysis of Emily Dickinson was freakishly feminine. I laughed, and that laugh surprised me, not by how it sounded, but by how easily it broke through the weight of the last week. God, I completely forgot about that. I wrote him a 15-page rebuttal and put it in his mailbox with annotations, I remembered. "And you framed it as a scientific article," Angelica added, laughing with me. "That's who you really are. Isabella. Not a society wife. Not someone's shadow. Carlos was trying to squeeze you into his frame, to make you live according to his script. But you don't have to play his role anymore. I don't need your protection anymore," I suddenly said seriously. "I don't just want to keep my inheritance. I want to rebuild Wheeler Publishing, to make it what my father always dreamed of. It could be like that." Angelica's eyes lit up when I started talking about rebuilding the publishing house, about my father's dream, which I was going to turn into reality, but she raised her hand, gently but firmly reminding, "But first, about the main thing. We need to see what's on this USB drive." She took her laptop out of her leather bag with practiced precision, opened the lid, inserted the disk, and almost immediately folders, files, names, dates began to appear on the screen, a digital shadow of the past, and with it, like an icy tide, the realization began to rise that we were on the verge of something much darker. More than just a corporate coup. What we found froze my veins, not with fear, but with a burning and deep horror that made my heart stop and then start pounding wildly, as if trying to escape from a cage. There were dozens of audio recordings, each clearly dated, systematically named, as if someone wanted this information to one day become a weapon. Carlos's voice sounded crystal clear, icy, controlling, filled with that cold self-confidence that I once mistook for competence. In conversations with his partners, he openly discussed how he manipulated the affairs of Wheeler Publishing, how elegantly he tricked the old man, that's what he called my father, around his finger, using me, his naive, loving daughter, to gain full access to archives, accounts, contracts, everything that mattered. Listening to him ridicule my affection, my devotion, And how he ticked off the capture stages wasn't just painful. It was like looking at my own reflection in a broken mirror, where each fragment causes a new wound. And here it is, the last entry. Date, just 2 weeks before the accident. Carlos sounded not like his old self, not like a polite and cold-blooded strategist, but like a man on the edge, annoyed, naked in his rage. They're getting suspicious, he told someone. Nestor asks questions, gets into rejected manuscripts. We need to speed up the deadlines. The voice of another man, unfamiliar, more restrained, answered, these things cannot be rushed. We agreed, 2 more years of controlled recession, followed by a bankruptcy filing, followed by an acquisition. Carlos snapped, I don't have 2 more years. I've spent enough time playing house games with their daughter. I need this to happen now. The recording ended abruptly, as if someone had suddenly turned off the microphone, or realized that they had said too much. Angelica and I stared at each other. The air in the room became viscous, almost tangible from the unspoken conclusions, like smoke from a long-extinguished campfire. She broke the silence first. Isabella, you need to take this to the police. I shook my head, slowly but firmly, not yet. This recording is suspicious, yes, but it is not direct evidence that he was involved in the accident. We need more. What are you thinking about? What is it? She asked, and I felt the outline of a plan forming in my head, risky, almost reckless, but perhaps the only possible one. I don't think Carlos knows that I know all this. He thinks I'm a broken, penniless widow who sleeps on a friend's couch. You want to use this, Angelica said, quickly grasping my train of thought. Exactly. If he thinks I'm desperate and helpless, he might lose his guard. Make mistakes. Reveal something. We can use this. It's dangerous, Isabella. This man is not who you thought he was. What if he was really involved in your parents' deaths? I didn't answer right away, just reached for a bottle of wine and filled both glasses to the brim, as if the toast was the only thing that could keep reality from falling apart. That's why I need your help. I can't do this alone. Angelica stared at me for a long time, not looking away, and finally nodded slowly. Good. I'm in business. But we will act wisely. Without unnecessary risk. Do you agree? I smiled for the first time that day with real confidence. We agree. We began to develop a strategy, sitting at a large wooden table, amid a mess of printouts, wine glasses, and laptops, and in this chaos, in the fire of rage and determination, a plan was born, not revenge, but the truth. My phone vibrated in my bag, distracting me from my thoughts. The name on the screen flashed like a flash from the past, Carlos. The message was as short as an order. I need a blue folder from my office. The one in the bottom drawer. Bring her back tomorrow at 3 p.m. Don't be late. No words of sympathy, no hint of concern. Neither how you're holding up, nor how you feel after your parents' funeral, is just a requirement. It's like I'm still his dutiful wife. I showed the message to Angelica. A dark, cold smile appeared on my lips. It's already starting. He needs something from me. Are you going to meet him? What is it? She asked. I nodded, already typing the answer, turning into the same Isabella he was used to seeing, meek, uncomplaining, dutiful. Sure. I'll be there, I wrote, and as I looked at Angelica, I felt a wave of determination shoot through me. The first round starts tomorrow, and Carlos doesn't even know who he's really dealing with. We continued planning late into the night, alternating discussions with sips of wine, fueled by a mixture of righteous anger and that strange gratitude that only grief can give birth to. Gratitude that my parents, even after leaving this world, were still there, giving me the last gift, the truth, and with it the chance to regain themselves. My life, my name, my destiny, and to bring Carlos Armani, the one who betrayed my love and destroyed my family, to justice. But I didn't know then that the blue folder he was demanding contained something much more terrifying and murderous than anything we found on the flash drive. Information that could not only destroy his empire, but also put my own life at risk. I still couldn't imagine that the game I was preparing to play was much more treacherous than I thought, with the stakes rising every day like an unpredictable wave in a stormy sea, and somewhere in the shadows, out of my sight, almost physically tangible, someone he was watching both of us, watching my every move, every word, every look, waiting to see what move I would make next and what mistake I might make. The lobby of the Waldorf Hotel shone with the forced luxury of the old world. Massive crystal chandeliers, spread like ice stalactites under the ceiling, cast warm shadows on the mirror-polished marble floors, on which the soft footsteps of people in expensive shoes echoed. The air was filled with a quiet but undeniably tangible whisper of wealth and power. I clutched the blue folder to my chest, as if it wasn't just a shabby folder with papers, but a shield that could protect me from everything that lay ahead, even though my heart was pounding louder and more painfully with every second, as if every beat of it was hitting my ribs, my temples, and my insides. Angelica's voice echoed in my head, "Remember, you're just Isabella. An abandoned wife. Meek. Humble. Heartbroken." I dressed appropriately for the role, without makeup, my hair pulled back in a simple ponytail, and I'm wearing the same clothes I left our penthouse in, sloppy, worn, and slightly rumpled, as if I really spent several sleepless nights in some backwater armchair, trying to figure out where my life ended and where a new, alien, unfamiliar one begins. Carlos expected me to fall apart. And I gave him exactly what he wanted, the image of a woman immersed in an abyss of sorrow and insecurity. "There you are," his voice, which had once seemed melodious to me, now sounded like a string stretched to the limit, cold and metallic. He was walking towards me from the bar with the same gait that I knew painfully well, confident, measured, with a slight half-smile on his lips, as if he owned the whole world and considered it natural. The expensive suit fit him perfectly, and if I were a stranger, would think, "Here comes a man without worries." But I knew that behind this facade there was a man who coldly abandoned his wife at her parents' funeral without even bothering to explain himself. "Carlos," I said, putting on a small, shaky smile. "I brought the folder you wanted." He didn't hug me, didn't ask how I was, didn't say a word of comfort. He just extended his hand, briefly and matter-of-factly. "Let's sit down." We moved to one of the corners of the lobby, where it was quieter, more comfortable, and away from prying eyes. The upholstered chairs in which I sank, as if in a quagmire, smelled of old leather and luxury. I handed him the folder, doing it with deliberate hesitation, so that our fingers briefly touched. I was looking for any reaction in his face, a glimmer of awkwardness, regret, pain, at least a hint of former affection. Nothing. Not even the slightest discomfort, as if I was not the woman he had lived with for 8 years, but just a courier who brought the documents. "Thank you for coming," he said coldly, almost mechanically, flipping through the pages. "I know that everything between us ended abruptly." Suddenly, I interjected, unable to completely hide the hurt in my voice. "You left me at my parents' funeral." He looked up, his eyes as blue as ever, but now icy. "I've been honest with you, Isabella. More honest than most men. The money ran out. There's no reason for us to stay together." I let my lower lip tremble, my eyes filled with tears, and although they were part of the image, there was also real pain in them, not so much from losing him as from betrayal, from the feeling that all these years were an illusion. 8 years old, Carlos. Did it mean anything to you? Business is business. Marriage is also a business. "You'll understand one day," he said, without looking up, returning to looking through the documents. "How are you coping? Have you found a place to live?" "I'm at Angelica's." "She was so kind to take me in," I said, twirling the wedding ring on my finger, which I had left on purpose, not as a sign of love, but as bait. "I'm not sure what I'm going to do, Carlos." "I have nothing." Something flashed across his face, maybe satisfaction, maybe relief. "You'll land on your feet. You've always had a talent for it. I don't even know who I am without you. Without my parents." My voice cracked, just as I wanted it to, adding a note of desperation to the performance. "Your father wasn't a business genius, Isabella. Everyone thought he was like that. Wheeler Publishing has been depleted for years. I was trying to help. I proposed modernization, digital strategies. He didn't listen. I swallowed my rage, forcing myself to nod obediently. He was old, fashioned, stubborn. In my own way. Carlos slammed the folder shut with obvious satisfaction and slipped it into his leather briefcase. The company will be liquidated soon. There are debts that need to be closed. Eliminated? I guessed, as if I'd just heard the verdict. But she's been in my family for 3 generations. That's life, Isabella. Everything ends. I studied his face, clinging to every feature, every shadow, looking for at least something from the man I once married. There's nothing left. Just the cold. Just the calculation. Just a stranger with my husband's face. I need to ask you something, I said, barely able to control the tremor in my voice, directing my gaze somewhere to the side, as if I really did not dare to look into the eyes of the man with whom I had spent almost a decade of my life. The police report mentions a breakdown. Do you think someone could have damaged their car? Not a single muscle moved on Carlos' face, but in his eyes, as transparent as the ice of a spring river, something sharp, irreconcilable, hard flashed, like an echo of anger, or rather fear, quickly hidden behind a mask of indifference. What an imagination you have, Isabella, he said in a flat voice, not allowing himself emotion for a moment. It was an accident. Tragic. Don't turn it into something more. Of course, I muttered, dropping my gaze, giving my face an expression of confusion, as if my imagination had really gone too far and I was trying to get on shaky ground of suspicion. I'm just trying to make sense of everything. Some things don't make sense. They just happen. He looked at his watch, exhaled almost impatiently. I have to go. I have a meeting. When he got up, I instinctively, like an actress striving for the climax of a scene, reached for his hand. The touch turned out to be weak, almost pleading. Carlos, please, could we try again? I still love you. It was a lie, bulky, bitter, viscous, like a sip of cheap wine that makes my tongue ache, but I knew I had to swallow it for the sake of the image, for the sake of the illusion of a devastated woman, lost and desperate. He pulled his hand out of my palm, almost gently, like a man carefully removing a moth from his shoulder so as not to damage its wings, but the meaning in this gesture was final. It's over, Isabella. The sooner you accept this, the better for both of us. Can I, at least, get my stuff out of the penthouse? I packed them. My assistant will contact you to arrange the delivery. He straightened his tie, casually but confidently, without looking in my direction. Then he left without turning around once, passing through the glow of chandeliers and the cold of luxury, as if he owned everything and everyone here except me. I stayed sitting, counting to 30 in my head, until my pulse slowed down, until my face became a mask again, ready for the next action. Then, without raising her head, she took out her phone and wrote briefly, "He's leaving." This message was for Angelica. She knew what to do. The plan was simple. I meet with Carlos, distract him, make him relax, and then she follows him, always in the shadows, always watching. We had to find out who he was involved with, who his partners were in this carefully hidden game. I gave Carlos a few minutes head start, and then I got up and left the hotel. Angelica was already waiting on the other side of the street, sitting in her car with the engine running. "Sit down," she called to me as I approached. He just got into a black Audi, headed east. We followed him, keeping our distance, like experienced hunters chasing their target in the urban jungle. The streets of Manhattan flashed before my eyes, the lights of storefronts, neon signs, passers-by immersed in their lives, not suspecting at all that an intrigue capable of changing destinies was involved in this ordinary evening. Carlos's car eventually turned onto a quiet street on the Upper East Side, stopping at a stately brown stone house whose facade breathed old money and even older connections. "Who is this place?" Angelica asked, squinting as we stopped a few cars behind. "I do not know," I replied, feeling my heart beat faster in my chest. "I've never seen him before." We watched Carlos get out of the car, look back, and jogged lightly up the steps. The door swung open before he could knock, and I gasped as I recognized the man who had greeted him. "This is the chairman of Pinnacle Media Group," I whispered. "They tried to buy Wheeler Publishing 3 years ago. Dad categorically refused them." With trembling fingers, I took out my phone and started taking pictures while the two men shook hands. I thought I could hear my father again. Columbo is ruthless. He gutted every independent publisher he bought. It looks like your husband has found a suitable partner, Angelica said gloomily. We waited for almost 2 hours, watching the lights go on and off outside the windows of the house, as lonely figures in coats move away from the entrance, as the street again plunges into silence. Finally Carlos came out, followed by Columbo and 2 other men I didn't recognize. We need to get closer, I whispered. I need to hear what they're saying. It's too risky, Angelica hissed, if Carlos sees you. But I was already opening the car door. I'll be careful. Don't turn off the engine. I slipped out of the car, hugging the walls and hiding in the shadows of the trees lining the street like silent witnesses. As I got closer, their voices became clearer and clearer, phrases breaking through the noise of passing cars in fragments. The probate hearing is next week, Carlos was saying. Without a valid will, challenging my rights as her husband, I will receive a controlling stake by the end of the month. And you're sure there's no other will? Columbo's voice was low, husky, like an old actor's. Nestor Berlusconi is predictable. The standard. Everything will be her daughter's. Who happens to be my wife? The laws are clear. I'm entitled to half of it as her husband. One of the other men, a high-browed man with narrow lips and a look in which one could see the ingrained habit of not asking unnecessary questions, finally spoke. His voice sounded hollow, as if it had escaped through a layer of dust and long-accumulated cynicism. What about the investigation of the brake line? Any movement on this? My blood froze in my veins, and I pressed myself against the rough trunk of an old elm tree, straining with all my might not to miss a single word of Carlos' answer, while terror swirled inside, like a thundercloud before a discharge. The police have ruled it an accident. The case is closed, Carlos replied calmly, and even from a distance you could hear him pronouncing these words with a confident laziness, as if repeating them not for the 1st or 10th time. I was ready to cooperate. I provided everything that was asked, but that's it. Columbo nodded, and there was less agreement in that nod than calculated satisfaction. The sooner we get this mess behind us, the sooner we can move forward with the acquisition, he said, as if it were a trivial delay in the schedule, and not about the lives they had erased overnight. The market for back catalog rights will not wait forever. I just saw Isabella, Carlos continued with a dismissive laugh. She's exactly as expected, broken, desperate, and uncomprehending. She has no idea what's going on. Leave it as it is. Columbo nodded again, but this time his voice was firmer, strained. The last thing we need is for her to get suspicious and hire some crusading lawyer. Trust me, Carlos. Carlos burst out laughing, and there wasn't an ounce of fun in his laugh, just emptiness and venom. She couldn't get out of the paper bag until I told her which end was open. She spent 8 years being the perfect trophy wife. No skills, no grit. Their laughter, harsh and cynical, echoed inside me like a physical blow, as if I had been pushed in the chest and the air was taken away, as if their words were a whip lashing at a vulnerable soul. I wanted to step out of the shadows, step forward, shout at the top of my voice that I know the truth, that they won't get away with the death of my parents or the dirty deals behind my back, but Angelica's voice, sounding in my memory like a quiet chord of reason, held me in place. Now is not the time. We need more evidence. The men continued to talk about the timing of the merger, the market valuation of assets, and legal details, but to me it all sounded like a distant echo, because one thing was thundering in my head: they had killed. They did it. Cold-blooded, predatory, methodical. Slowly, as if in a trance, I stepped back, step by step, like an animal wounded but still able to survive, and returned to the car. You look like you've seen a ghost, Angelica said as I slid into the passenger seat. I think I just heard them confess to killing my parents, I whispered, and my voice cracked, like a strained nerve. Angelica's eyes widened, and her hands instinctively tightened on the steering wheel. Are you sure? I nodded, repeating her words like a spell, exactly, verbatim, from memory, as if fixing a clue. My mind was racing between pieces of logical chains. If the mechanic was mentioned, if the breakdown was mentioned as a tool, If Carlos was not afraid to talk about it openly, then he was sure that the case was finally closed. So someone helped. "We need to go to the police," Angelica said. "With what you've heard?" I shook my head. "They'll dismiss it as the paranoid delusions of a grief-stricken daughter." "No. We need hard evidence. Something irrefutable." "What about USB recordings?" She narrowed her eyes. "Suspicious, but not conclusive. We need a mechanic. If he got paid, if he messed up the brakes, he's the key to everything." Angelica started the car, pulling away from the curb, watching in the mirror as Carlos and his men began to drive away. The name of the mechanic should be on the police report. I took out my phone and quickly dialed Rossi's message. The answer came almost instantly: Mattia Girardi. "Girardi's car repair shop. I was working on your dad's car 3 days before the accident. Regular maintenance. We need to talk to him," I said, and I felt like I'd taken a step in the right direction for the first time. "No," Angelica turned her head to me. "You're too recognizable. If Carlos has this guy in his pocket, he can warn him if you show up and ask questions." She was right. As always. "So what do we do?" The corners of her lips curved, and the dangerous light that I already knew and had learned to trust lit up in her eyes. "I have a friend. A former client. In fact, he is a former policeman who became a writer. Thrillers, detective stories, dangers, they're all his. Maybe he can help us talk to Mr. Girardi." 2 days later, we were sitting in the living room of her apartment, where everything smelled of lavender and old coffee, opposite a man with wide breasts framed by an ash-colored sweater, with a face lined like an old highway, and eyes that reflected emptiness that had known too much. "Let's get this straight," he said, looking at me with cold directness. "In your opinion, your husband organized the murder of your parents by hacking into their car in order to gain control of the publishing company and assets worth $12 million? I nodded. "And that's not all. There are rights in the catalog that are potentially worth much more." Eduardo whistled, raising his eyebrows and shaking his head slightly. A mixture of regret and irony could be read in his gaze. "People have killed for less money, but this is weak, Isabella, very weak." He looked straight at me, and there was no mockery or sarcasm in those eyes, just the calm, polished skepticism of a former policeman who had seen too much to allow himself to simply believe in words. "I know what I heard," I insisted, feeling a familiar wave of anger and despair rise inside. "Overheard conversations, even if they were accidental, even if they weren't recorded, are still evidence, even if it's indirect." Eduardo slowly tapped his fingers on the wooden surface of the coffee table, staring into space, as if he were replaying hundreds of similar cases, thousands of interrogations, millions of fates in his mind. "Overheard conversations, as you know, are unreliable and unacceptable in court," he repeated, more gently, as if reminding himself, not me. "But the mechanic, if he was involved, that's another matter. He can talk. Especially if he feels that he has been framed, forced to take the blame. Do you think Carlos would have attacked him?" Angelica asked in an instant, her voice as sharp as a blade, and there was a tremor of impatience in it. "People like your husband," Eduardo replied without hesitation, "don't protect little guys. They are expendable." I leaned forward, trying to hold Eduardo's attention, putting into my voice all the determination that was burning me from the inside, like a flame penetrating into every cell, "so that you can help us. I'm not asking for much. Just talk to Girardi. Feel him out." Eduardo nodded slowly, as if agreeing not to the request, but to the fact that there was no other way out. "I'll talk to him. But no promises," he added, as if every syllable had cost him years of experience and losses. His expression became serious, the shadow from his eyes deepened. "And you stay away. If everything goes wrong, if he panics or turns out not to be who he claims to be, I don't want you around." We agreed, although in my case, consent was nothing more than a gesture. My determination wouldn't let me stay away, but I knew Eduardo was right. My presence could ruin everything. The next day, when Eduardo was heading to the Girardi auto repair shop, I decided to go to the place where my father's living soul once beat, to the Wheeler Publishing House, to the very heart of his work, what he had been building for decades. I hadn't been there since the funeral, and I felt my memory calling me back to see with my own eyes what was left of his empire, now under someone else's control. The shocked expression on the face of the young woman at the reception when I entered the building told me everything I needed to know. "Mrs. Armani," she muttered, rising from her seat, almost in a panic. "We didn't expect," I corrected gently but clearly, "Miss Marchetti. And I am the owner of this company." My words came out harsher than I intended, but I couldn't afford to be Armani's wife anymore. "Sarah, I don't need an appointment," I added, seeing her eyes flicker toward the elevators like a rabbit scenting a fox. "Of course, it's just. Mr. Armani said that you weren't coming, that you took the time to grieve." She trailed off, realizing how inappropriate she sounded. "How caring he is," I whispered, forcing a tight smile. "Is he here?" Sarah shook her head. "No, he's in meetings outside the office all day." "Perfect." I straightened up. "I'd like to see my father's office." "You are welcome." Sarah hesitated, then, without looking up, handed me a badge. "Of course, he's there, though." Mr. Armani cleaned it up. My stomach clenched painfully. The day after the funeral, of course, he did it. Carlos never wasted any time. To erase the traces of someone else's presence, to plant your own. I rode the elevator to the management floor, holding my breath, as if I were about to cross the threshold of another world. The space in which I once spent hours watching my father work, absorbing the smell of books, paper, tobacco, and determination, turned out to be cold and dead. The bookshelves, once lined with the first editions of Wheeler Publishing's most significant works, were empty. The antique table where my father signed contracts, talked to authors, and negotiated with investors has disappeared. I was standing in the doorway, and such a wave of grief and powerlessness overwhelmed me that I had to grab the jamb to keep from falling. It wasn't just the furniture that was removed. It was my connection to him, his last physical reality, erased on someone's orders. "Can I help you, Mrs. Armani?" A familiar voice sounded behind me, and I turned around. Standing in front of me was Patricia Folassi, my father's executive assistant, a woman with gray streaks in her dark hair, as restrained as a Swiss bank and devoted as no one else. "Patricia." I stepped up to her and hugged her, inhaling the familiar scent of her perfume, jasmine and vetiver, the scent of calm and constancy. "It's nice to see you," she replied, hugging me tightly and warmly. "I was so worried about you after everything." She stammered, unable to find the words. "Did you hear that?" I asked, and Patricia just nodded. Gossip travels fast in the office. Plus, Mr. Armani made it clear that he was cleaning up. There's an icy lump in my stomach. He has already fired half of the editors. Most of those who were loyal to your father were replaced by their own people. From Pinnacle. "He can't do this," I whispered. "He doesn't have the authority to do that." Patricia's expression was sympathetic, but resigned, like that of a person who has accepted an inevitability with which he does not agree with his heart, but which he has to accept with his mind. Her voice was low, almost confessional, as she said, "He showed the board of directors a power of attorney stating that you, Isabella, gave him full control over the company during your grieving period related to the death of your parents and subsequent absence." No one even thought to question it. Everything looked so official, carefully decorated, backed up with seals and signatures. Rage rose in me like a bubbling underground river, ready to burst through the rocks, eroding everything in its path. How dare he? How far was Carlos willing to go to erase everything that my father had created, subjugating not only the business, but also the very memory of him? "Where are my father's things?" I asked, feeling my voice tremble. "His books, personal folders, notes? The contents of the cabinet?" Patricia lowered her voice, glanced back at the door, as if someone could be listening, even through the walls. "I tried to keep track of everything. I knew you'd want to know." "Thank you," I said, squeezing her hand, drawing strength from that simple touch, as if it were a piece of the life I was missing. "Is there a place where we can talk in private? I need your help." Patricia nodded and led me down the hallway to the end of the floor, where there was a small conference room, almost forgotten by everyone who did not remember that meetings had been held there before my father's time. As soon as the doors softly closed behind us, I exhaled and started talking, without pausing or looking back, as if in fear that if I stopped, I wouldn't be able to continue. I told her everything from Carlos' cold-blooded betrayal to the mystery revealed by my parents' letters, about the bills, about the property, about the vanished fortune, about collusion with Pinnacle and the deliberate destruction of Wheeler Publishing from the inside. Patricia listened in silence, nodding only occasionally, her face becoming more and more gloomy, more and more tense. I knew something was wrong, she finally said when I finished, and there was weariness in her voice, laced with long-standing anxiety. Your father, he became restless a few months before the accident. He constantly double-checked the documents that Carlos touched, as if he felt something, but I could not imagine that it had come to this. I need access to my father's computer, I said, no longer asking, but demanding, as an heiress, as a daughter, as someone who would not back down. Everything he could save, all the letters, drafts, notes. Patricia pursed her lips. Mr. Armani ordered everything to be erased. Standard procedure, he said. Of course he did, I hissed. Carlos leaves nothing to chance. Patricia smiled a little, but there was bitterness in that smile. But your father was old-fashioned. He made backups, on physical media. My heart was racing. Where are they? External hard drives. She nodded. He kept one in his desk drawer, the one that Carlos found and took away when he was clearing out the office. But there was another one. He called it fail-safe, kept it in the false bottom of the third drawer of the sideboard, in his home office. I stared at her in disbelief. The lake house? But they sold it. Patricia shook her head. Your father told me that they didn't put this house in the books. He wanted privacy, a place that no one knew about. Especially Carlos. It was their secret, their sanctuary. Hope flooded into me with such force that for a moment I forgot where I was. Do you have an address? She took out her phone. Better. I have the keys. Your father left them with me in case of an emergency. He said I should give them to you, if anything happens to him. She handed me a bunch of keys on a worn leather keychain, and I clutched them in my hand like a charm. At that moment, my phone vibrated, a message from Eduardo. We need to meet now. It's worse than we thought. I met Patricia's gaze, and a plan was already rapidly forming in my head. I need something else, I said. Can you get me all the personnel files of the people Carlos fired, and copies of all the documents he signed using that power of attorney? She narrowed her eyes. It's risky. If he finds out. He won't know until it's too late, I interrupted, grabbing her hand. My parents have been building this company all their lives. I won't let Carlos ruin it. Patricia nodded, no longer cautiously, but with renewed determination. I'll get you everything by tomorrow. When I left the building, trying to stay in the shadows, unnoticeable, like a guest whom no one invited, I was overcome by a strange, almost painful feeling of calm. Everything started to fall into place. Carlos thought he was dismembering my father's empire piece by piece, like a surgeon dissecting the body of a soulless patient, but he didn't even realize that by doing so he was creating a case that would collapse on his head with deafening force. But first, I needed to find out exactly what Eduardo had told me, and why it was worse than we thought. I hailed a taxi, giving the driver the address of the coffee shop where Eduardo was waiting, and at the moment when the car pulled away, gently pulling away from the curb, I did not even notice the black sedan slowly flowing into the stream of cars behind us, like a shadow that decided to pursue its owner. I didn't see how his driver, hunched over the steering wheel, hurriedly pressed the phone to his ear, looking straight ahead, but seemingly not noticing the road at all, and I certainly didn't realize then that my meticulous, step-by-step investigation had just been compromised, that Carlos now knew that I was plotting, I knew where I was, and that the game, which had seemed dangerous but controlled until that moment, suddenly changed the rules. The stakes became higher, and the price was probably equal to a life. The coffee shop was crowded, buzzing like a beehive, filled with the midday energy of office workers and students who sought salvation in strong coffee and the feigned silence of conversations. In the far corner, in the penumbra against the wall, Eduardo sat, his broad shoulders hunched over a steaming mug, fingers fiddling with the edge of a paper napkin, and the expression on his face, when he saw me, it was so gloomy that it took my breath away. "We need to move," he said without preamble, grabbing his jacket and leading me to the exit, not turning around, but casting short, nervous glances over his shoulder every few steps, as if someone was already following us, as if the city had suddenly become a stranger. "My car is around the corner," he muttered. I stopped, my legs buckled, and he grabbed my elbow without slowing down, as if he knew I wouldn't believe him. "This morning," he continued, "he was found in the garage. Carbon monoxide poisoning. An alleged suicide. But you talked to him yesterday." I whispered, hardly believing the words. "He was scared, Isabella. He said that the guy paid him $5,000 to miss something during the maintenance of your dad's car. He claimed he didn't know what was going to happen, but he knew it wasn't just a mistake." I gripped my seatbelt buckle with my fingers, buckling myself in with trembling hands. "Did he identify Carlos?" "I've never met him personally." "Everything was done through an intermediary." Eduardo stepped on the gas. The car jerked and soon crashed into a slow-moving traffic jam. "But here's the rub," he said. "Girardi kept the photos of the brake line. Before and after maintenance. Evidence of forgery." "Where are these photos?" I whispered, clutching the steering wheel in front of me, even though I wasn't driving. "He gave me copies." Eduardo patted the inside pocket of his jacket. "He was going to go to the police today and confess. But now he's dead." I closed my eyes, feeling a wave of terror wash over me, thick and sticky like fog over a swamp. "Carlos ordered him killed." "It looks like it." "And that means you're in danger too." His gaze lingered on me for a moment. There was no fear or surprise in it, just understanding. "He mentioned something else," Eduardo said quietly. "He said that guy called your parents obstacles. Plural." A chill ran down my spine. "But my mother shouldn't have been in the car that day," I whispered, sounding uncertain, as if I was doubting my own memories. "She decided to join her father at the last minute." "So your father was the target," Eduardo nodded grimly. "And your mother turned out to be collateral damage." I looked out the window, the blurred outlines of the city flowing behind the glass, like dreams that I can't remember after waking up. "Where are we going?" "To a safe place. I have a cabin in the northern part of the state. Offline." Eduardo handed me the phone. "Angelica." I told her to meet us there. Bring a USB stick and anything else that might be important. As I dialed the number, he continued, "There aren't enough photos to charge. But if you combine them with notes, documents, and what you overheard from Carlos, it can become the basis for a serious investigation." Angelica answered on the second ring. "Eduardo?" "What's happening?" "This is Isabella," I said quickly, grabbing the phone. "Everything got out of control. Girardi is dead. Carlos knows everything." "I've already packed my things," she replied calmly, but there was a hidden determination in her voice. I was expecting something like this. "But, Isabella, there's something else. Your parents' lawyer called today. Rossi. He said it was urgent. He didn't talk on the phone, just that it changes everything." The last words were said softly, almost on an exhale, as if she herself hadn't believed it yet. "Tell her to contact Rossi." Eduardo picked up the phone again. "Have him meet us at the cabin." I delivered the message and hung up, my thoughts darting from one to the other, like a swarm of birds disturbed by a gunshot. What could Rossi have discovered that changed everything? What discovery was hidden under this dry, laconic phrase? As we left the city, the streets began to thin out, the neon lights were replaced by the deafening silence of fields and pine forests. I thought about Patricia, about the keys to the house on the lake, another mystery, another piece of the puzzle that my parents had left me. "Eduardo," I said, "I need to make one stop. My parents had real estate that Carlos doesn't know about." "It's too risky," he frowned, but I shook my head. "It's important." There may be a backup copy of the hard drive. Proofs. He was silent for a moment, then nodded. Where is it? Not far from here. It's not that far from your cabin. Okay, we'll check it out first, but quickly. 3 hours later we turned onto a narrow gravel road that disappeared into the depths of the forest, where mighty pine trees merged overhead into a green vault that blocked the sun's rays, and their shadows lay on the hood of the car as harbingers of what awaits us. The lake house appeared suddenly, as if it had grown out of the ground itself, modest, A-shaped, with darkened wooden paneling, hiding among the trees, whose trunks seemed to be the guardians of its silence. The wide windows reflected the midday sun, which was breaking in them like in water. Wait here, Eduardo said shortly, and, pulling the gun out from under the seat, he shot me a look full of determination. I felt my heart tighten, but not a word of doubt escaped my lips. We both understood that everything had gone too far, and caution was now a matter of life. When he waved his hand, signaling that everything was clear, I got out of the car, holding the key in my hands, which Patricia handed over to me with such reverence, as if it contained not just access to the house, but to the truth, preserved for years. The lock clicked softly, as if it recognized me, and the door opened slowly, letting in the scent of pine, old wood, and a multitude of memories, brought on suddenly and mercilessly. This house, I knew it from every crack in the floor, to the creak of the stairs and the drafts running through the hallway. We spent our summer weekends here, when my father was still preoccupied with work, when my mother was laughing, scattering rose petals on the lake water, and I was learning how to catch a dragonfly in the palm of my hand. I muttered words that reminded me of the way, barely audible, as I led Eduardo down a short corridor, where a dark sideboard stood in its former place, in the third drawer of which, according to Patricia, my father hid his last secret. I knelt down, my fingers found a seam in the wood, and the panel, almost noiselessly, gave way, revealing a secret compartment. There was an external hard drive, silver, heavy, with a neatly labeled label, a sealed envelope, and a small digital voice recorder, black and almost invisible, like a witness watching in silence. Eduardo. I whispered, and he was right next to me, looking at the find as if it were the solution to a murder, salvation, and a curse at the same time. I grabbed everything, stuffing it into my bag, and at that moment, the headlights cut through the space outside the window, causing both of us to freeze. Quiet, he commanded, gesturing for me to step back. Through the curtain, he saw a black sedan, the one that had followed me earlier, and 2 men in suits too neat to be ordinary passers-by. My heart started pounding with the fury of a hunted animal. Carlos? Maybe. But I didn't have time to ask. The back door. I nodded, and as if on cue, we rushed through the kitchen to the exit. There was a deafening crash from behind. The front door was kicked out with such force, as if a monster was standing behind it. Eduardo, with a pistol in his hand, pushed me forward, and we jumped out the back door into the forest, which was digging into us with claws of branches tearing our clothes. Keep going. Stop it. He shouted, stumbling, clutching his side, where a bloodstain was rapidly spreading under his coat. The cabin, 3 miles north. Angelica knows. I'm not leaving you. Go on. And he pushed me away with unexpected force, turning around to cover my retreat. Tears made it difficult to see, but I didn't stop. The evidence, the dictaphone, the disc, the letter, was clutched to my chest like a lifeline in a raging sea, while the forest swallowed me up in its darkness. Shot. Second. Then the silence is dull, heavier than the sounds. I ran, clinging to the hope that it wasn't all in vain, that the sacrifices weren't in vain. Branches whipped at my face, my legs were shaking, my lungs were burning, but I knew that stopping meant death. After what seemed like an eternity, I saw a warm light in the distance, making its way through the thicket. As I slowly approached, I recognized the outline of the hut, and the silhouette in the doorway stepped forward. Isabella. A voice full of relief and anxiety. It's me, I breathed, stumbling on the threshold. Angelica ran over and picked me up, helping me in. Where is Eduardo? My voice broke. They shot him. He stayed, so I could leave. Tears choked me. Angelica's face paled. Who? Carlos's men? I think so. They found us at the lake house. I collapsed into a chair, clutching my bag like a mother clutching a child to her chest. We need to call the police. We've already done it, a familiar voice said. I turned around and saw Antonio Rossi standing by the fireplace, looking gloomy and collected. Eduardo called me after talking to Gherardi. I knew that things would escalate quickly. He could be in there, dying. The state police are on their way. They'll find him. Rossi looked at the bag. What did you find? I put the contents on the table. A hard drive, an envelope, and a voice recorder. Something my parents wanted me to know. Rossi held up the envelope, peering at the seal, the thin paper, the watermark of his own company. Open it, he said firmly. There was one piece of paper inside, the result of a DNA test. I unfolded it with bated breath, my fingers trembling, as if intuition already told me that now I was going to see something that would not fit into the usual picture of the world. My gaze ran over the lines where my parents' names were listed in black and white, but there was also a third line, a third DNA profile that did not belong to either of them. I was petrified, looking at someone else's ID. Who is it? What does it mean? Rossi, who was standing a little further away, took a quiet step towards me. His eyes were full of a shadow of knowledge, and the voice that sounded after a pause was so quiet that it seemed he was afraid that the words would destroy the fragile reality in which I was still holding on. There is something you need to know, Isabella. Something your parents only wanted to reveal in the worst-case scenario. I slowly looked up at him, feeling my chest fill with lead. What is it? I asked, not recognizing my own voice. Rossi straightened up, his face stern and impenetrable. The accident in which you thought you had lost your parents was not the first attempt to eliminate your father. There was another incident a few years ago, a heart attack after intense training that almost killed him. It scared them. It's enough for them to take drastic measures. I stared at him without blinking, my head buzzing. What measures? I whispered. They faked their deaths. The world rocked. The walls, the floor, even the air around me. Everything suddenly lost its shape and meaning. What did you just say? I took a step back, as if I wanted to run away from those words. Rossi held the paper in front of him and pointed at it. The bodies in those coffins did not belong to your parents. The DNA test proves it. Your parents are alive, Isabella. They were under protective custody, cooperating with the federal authorities. They helped build the case against Pinnacle Media Group. I sank into a chair, my heart pounding, disbelief and timid hope fighting in my head. It's impossible. I've seen them. I've identified the bodies. Rossi shook his head, there was sympathy in his voice, but also firmness. You saw what they wanted you to see. The bodies were carefully picked up, and the car accident made it difficult to identify them accurately. It was part of the plan to convince Carlos that they were dead. I jumped up, my hands clenched into fists. Why? Why did they let me go through this? Why did they leave me alone? Anger was bursting inside me. But before Rossi could answer, a voice came from the doorway, a voice that took my breath away. To protect you. I turned around, and the world that had seemed destroyed had changed again. They were standing there, my parents, alive, real. My father looked older, his facial features had sharpened, but it was him, and next to him was my mother, just as slender, with her favorite scarf, the smell of which I remembered from childhood. Dad, was all I could whisper. Tears blurred my eyes. I couldn't believe it, I couldn't move. Mom rushed to me, and her hugs fell on me like a summer downpour after a long drought. My girl, my darling, I'm so sorry. Her voice was shaking. I reached out to my father. He hugged me to him. His hand went to my back. You're really alive, I whispered, not believing my happiness. We had no choice, he said, his voice rough, as if every syllable was worth the effort. When we realized who Carlos was and that Pinnacle was not just a media corporation, but a front for a criminal syndicate, we realized that they would not stop. The FBI came to us. The best way to survive is to disappear. You left me, my voice broke into a scream, and even my embrace could not hold back the storm that was tearing from within. You left me with him. We thought it would be safer this way, he replied, and a look of real regret crossed his face. Carlos only wanted our assets. We didn't believe that he would harm you. But when he turned his back on you, we were watching, we knew everything. At the funeral, we realized that we needed to act faster. At that moment, the door swung open. Eduardo entered, leaning on the shoulders of two policemen. His side was bandaged, but he was on his feet. Sorry for the drama, he breathed, smiling faintly. He pretended to be dead. They're gone. My father came up to him and patted him on the shoulder. Eduardo has been working with us from the very beginning. He's a former FBI agent, now an author, but his true role has always been here. His story, his courage. He saved us. I looked at Eduardo, and everything fell into place. His silence, his help, his persistence. Did you arrange all this? I asked. He shook his head, but before answering, Angelica intervened. My friendship with you has always been real. But yes, I knew. I couldn't tell you. Sorry. I looked at them, at my parents, at the people who had guided me through horror and pain. Everything I knew turned out to be a lie. But everything I felt was true. What now? I whispered, feeling the world changing again. Now it's the end, said the father. The evidence you found, combined with ours, is enough to destroy Pinnacle and imprison Carlos. It's all over tonight. Eduardo nodded. The arrests are already underway. As dawn slowly began to creep through the windows of the hut, we sat at a wooden table, outlining the last steps. My parents will remain under protection until the operation is completed. And then, a new beginning. Wheeler Publishing, I whispered. You said it had to be. The father nodded. Strength. You were supposed to lead it. You are her. Not just a daughter. Director. A woman with a voice. And when the first rays of the sun colored the sky, I felt something new settle inside me. Not relief, but confidence. Not a girl broken at the grave, but a woman born out of pain. Carlos wanted to destroy me. Instead, he forged me. A new one. Phoenix. Reborn from the ashes. Write a comment on what you think about this story and don't forget to subscribe to the channel and like it. See you soon.